Hello there. Thank you for joining me. The name of today's painting is Home on the Range. Let's just go right onto the palette and get started. Let's put us out a puddle of Snow White, another puddle of Antique Gold, a smaller puddle of Boysenberry, a smaller puddle of Georgia Clay. Okay, now I'm going to the palette and I'm going to mix my sky color. And I'm going to start with white and antique gold. Just pull off a little puddle of white and add antique gold to it. This time I'm not going to wet the canvas. I've been doing that in some of the previous shows, but this time I'm not going to. I'm going to use a little bit different approach. Keep the brush good and wet. Good and liquid this time. See, that's the great thing about acrylic paints, is you can use them like a watercolor consistency, or you can use them sort of like oil paints. And I'm using them a little bit thin in this particular painting. Now I'm going to add, to that mixture, I'm going to add a little bit of Boysenberry, little bit of Georgia Clay. And I'm going to continue, going to finish my sky. Okay, we're going to fill in the remainder. And what I've tried to do in this series is just show you different ways to use acrylic paints. Because some of you I know are new at it and using acrylics, and you're probably trying to use them like oils, and you're like maybe like I was when I first started using acrylics. I thought one way was the only way that they would work, but they're so versatile. You can just do wonders with them. Okay, now I'm going to a fan brush and establish a cloud. Yellow, which is antique gold, and a little snow white. And then I'm going to blend downward at an angle into the horizon mixture. Maybe a little wisp right up in here. I need a little more paint on my brush, don't I? Yep, there we go. Okay, now I'm going to a mop brush and do a little bit of blending. And if that suits me, I'll leave it. I think I'll touch up just a little area right here. Make a little more of a dip. I just use the Georgia Clay to do that with. Okay, that suits me real well. So what I'll do now is there's some background trees back in here, and I'm going to use dark chocolate, midnight green while that sky is still a little bit wet. While the sky is still a little bit wet, and my colors will blend on the canvas for me. It'll help me to get the effect of distance. Now just watch this little feat. I'm going to lay the color in, and then I'm going to stipple upward. See the brush picking up that soft yellow? And it's softening my paint for me. And it's getting my value established, and I'm not even having to work real hard to do it. Okay, now there's another tree that goes over here. Let's catch that while we're working with while the sky is still a little bit wet. I want to add a little Georgia clay to that mixture. Okay, let's add a little more Georgia clay now. Move right on across. Let's add a little bit of our sky mixture to the edges to soften them down just a little bit to get the effect of distance that we want. We want to be able to see the sun shining through the trees. Okay, now a great big old green tree goes over this area, so we're not going to have to fill in the middle area. Just the outside edges is all we were concerned with. Soften that down just a little more. My paint was a little bit dry there, a little bit thick. Okay, that's the exact effect that I wanted. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to jump down to the cliff and put a wash on the cliff. We're going to use antique gold Georgia clay. Now you know what a wash is. A wash is your paint that is so thin, it's thinned to a transparent consistency. You can actually see through it. We have two cliffs in this painting. One there and one here. Okay, now while that's still wet, I want to get the shadows underneath the cliff, underneath the grassy area that's hanging over the cliff. For that, I'm going to use Georgia clay with a touch of, let me back up on that. I'm going to use dark chocolate with a touch of ebony black. And I want this to kind of trickle downward. So I thin this mixture of dark chocolate and ebony black just a little so that it would kind of seep down into the wet paint underneath. I'll just help it get started with my brush, and then I'll just let it do its thing. Okay, I'm going to make a mixture of Georgia clay and Boysenberry and fill in the roof of the little small buildings in the horizon area. I'm going to add just a touch of dark chocolate to that mixture. Okay, we have two little buildings. Well, we really have three back in here. Let's catch all three at the same time. Paint's a little bit thin for these little bitty boogers. Okay, that caught one. Here's the roof on the other. And here's the third one. Now, I won't be able to put the structure in yet until that dries a little bit, so I'll skip down and work on the ground area. Now, I'll go to a bigger brush for that, and my mixture will be antique gold, midnight green. I'm going to add a little Georgia clay to that. Brighten it up just a little bit. Midnight gold and antique green, a touch of Georgia clay. Right on out now into where the grassy area overhangs the cliff. Let's jump down here and catch this one at the same time because we're using the very same colors. big old tree hangs out over here, so we don't really have to worry about that at all. I do want to darken the floor of the cliff right through here just a little bit with dark chocolate. That would be your flat area, and might as well catch this one at the same time. Little dark chocolate. I had the ground area mixture on my brush, and to that I just added a little dark chocolate to get the flat. Well, I call it the floor of the cliff. I don't know really what it would be. But it's your flat area, and you notice that I'm using horizontal strokes for that. All right, let's catch this little area right in here. We have a little bush that goes there, so it's not so important to cover it, but just in case, a little bit of the canvas, just in case we didn't put a great big bush, a little bit of the canvas would be left showing, then we don't want that to happen. Okay, now this is a little white added to my antique gold. This is to get the highlight on the edge of the ground area. Notice the angle that I'm pulling. I'm pulling in, up into the ground area. Do the same thing up here. Now, it wouldn't be quite as bright up in here. Blend them in just a little bit. And let them dry. Okay, now let's fill in the greenery on the sides while this is still drying in here. We have a lot of greenery, so we might as well get going with it. Okay, let's use midnight green, dark chocolate. And I'm going to brush load, brush mix. What I do is I dip the brush into each puddle of paint 2 or 3 times and let it just sort of mix on my brush rather than my palette. Let's start on this side. And I'm going to stip a lot of tree shapes over in here, and that's going to surround this area and sort of frame it, almost like a picture frame. Let some hang out over the ground area. This area down in here is going to be covered. Might as well stipple it at the same time we're doing the rest of the trees on the sides. This overlaps the greenery that we've just laid in. It's right on up over that cliff. Well, I picked up a lot more green that time. See, we're getting a pretty variety in the foliage. There's a little bit of bush that sits right here. Let's just go ahead and lay it in while we're working with this color. And it goes up a little bit, and let's soften down to get some shadows underneath it. Let it hang over the cliff. Back down to here again. Not so happy with the top of this one. Okay, now let's just move right on across. We'll lay the color in, and you stipple upward over the floor of the cliff, or your flat area. Moving on across now. I'm using a bristle brush for this because I'm working in a dry area this time, and I want the paint to push down in the teeth of the canvas. And a bristle brush has stiff, the bristles are stiff, and it'll push the paint for you. Where soft like a synthetic Sable or a Sable brush just won't do the trick. Okay, now there's a great big old tree over here, so let's go over and catch that now. fact, it just sits on the shadowed part sits on the edge of the cliff. See, I picked up a little more green that time. You're getting a prettier saturation of colors here. Much prettier variety than if I had mixed with the knife. Oh, let's catch this little bitty area right here. And now we'll go to this big old open space over here. You want to keep your edges ragged. You want to keep them uneven. You want to be able to see through the tips, the edges of the foliage. And you may get tired of hearing me say that, but that's so important in a painting. Keep your foliage from ending up looking like a real thick ball. I know you've seen that, and I have too, many, many, many times. Let's let some of this hang down over the cliff a little bit. I think we can go back now and work on the houses. White and dark chocolate. Okay, let's start on this one over here, this little flat booger. Okay, we have another one here. And one more right here. And they should have a shadow underneath the roof, underneath the little flat roof first. This is dark chocolate. Move on over to the third one. Okay, even though they're little bitty small structures, they still have to have a light and a dark, wouldn't you? Let's let our light come from the left, so we'll have to darken the front of this one. But we darkened the side of the one beside it. They look so good, I just can't hardly stand it. There's a little bitty windmill that sits back in there too. For that, I'm going to use a little ebony black and dark chocolate. A little white, a little bitty windmill, a little white, and get sort of a soft gray with kind of a brownish cast to it. Now I know I'm going to be in your way right here, but this is not going to take but a minute, and then I'll move hurriedly and you can see what we've done. Let's put some blades on it. A ladder, so they can get up there to fix the blades, because they're always, I know you've seen them just like I have with 2 or 3 blades missing. Well, they have to get up there to work on those, so they have to have that ladder. They have no choice. Okay, now let's start adding some shadows. Or let's add a shadow rather under this grassy area, this tree area here. We're going from the dark tree to the light ground area too fast. We're jumping a value there. It's just not going to work. This cliff needs to be shadowed on both edges. And I'm just using dark chocolate real thin for that. Okay, now I want to increase that shadow a little bit under the cliff, just here and there. Give it a little more oomph. I just used a darker mixture of the ebony black and the dark chocolate. Okay, now let's add some pretty work in the foreground and pull the painting together. Let's add some flowers, some wildflowers, desert flowers or country flowers. Let's use a little Georgia clay, a little bit of Boysenberry, and a little bit of antique gold. Makes a beautiful mixture. Just get some wildflowers. Let's go over to this side and do the same thing. Go right on up and dress it up a little bit. Now this is just a little old El Cheapo brush that I use. I call it my foliage brush. A lot of times I lay foliage in with it. A lot of times I establish little flowers like this with it. It's, like I said, just a little El Cheapo. Okay, now I'm going to wash it, and we're going to put a few blue flowers. Then I'm going to get a highlight on that big blah tree there. Let's use Sapphire blue and white. We'll use the same brush. Just kind of makes them for you, doesn't it? Let's go over to this side and add a few and even this little thing up. We don't want it balanced, but we don't want all of the color on one side. Okay, now I'm going to highlight the tree. Yellow ochre, little boysenberry, and I'm just using that mixture that I had the little Georgia clay in it. Let's go a little bit lighter. Antique gold, a little bit more antique gold. Let's catch a few of the edges and soften those down just a little bit. Put a little over in here. Okay, now let's go to a script liner and put some little twigs and just sort of little dead twigs and things that would be growing out in an area like this. Not growing if they're dead, would they be? But they have been at one time, and they add a whole lot to a painting like this. It shows that it's kind of overgrown and uncared for anymore. Let's pull a few weeds up in through here. Well, Claire, we're just getting a real pleasing look here. I'm going to soften down this edge of this greenery just a little. And I'm going to add a little greenery on the edge. Paint dried a little bit right there, so I'm just stippling another mixture over it, which was the green, and soften it down just a little. Now I can also do that with the yellow, antique gold and yellow on the edges here. You don't want a lot of paint on your brush when you do this though. See how it's softening those harsh edges? Sure you do. A little bit too much, go back with your green again. Oh, that's giving us a pretty look, pretty soft look in there. I love to work with these big old trees. They're the kind they have out west like this. They just, you don't think of these big old tree like this in the west, but they have, I don't know the name of them, but in the Dallas area, they are loaded with them. And I think they're about the prettiest things I've ever laid eyes on. You see them in a lot of the old masters paintings, that type tree. Okay, let's just do a little touch up here and there on the entire painting, just wherever we see a spot we need a little touch. I think I'll jump down on the cliff here and pull a few more ruts in it. Had a harsh edge down in there. I just kind of softened it up a little bit. Okay, let's get a little bit more of a highlight now. Let's use antique. No, let's use cadmium yellow and white on the tips of these, right here on the tips. Then we'll soften them backwards just a little. Back into the cliff. Just brighten up one or two of these pink boogers over in here, these little pink flowers. Get us a few little wildflowers. And then let's step off and see. Well, I think we like it pretty well. I've enjoyed being with you. Thank you.